She lay frozen beside her baby in the snow, until a silent Apache warrior wrapped them in his cloak of destiny. Arizona Territory, January 1874. The mountains were buried under a storm so fierce that even the wolves had gone silent. Snow fell in endless sheets, covering every trail, every sound, every chance of escape. In that frozen wilderness, a young mother staggered through the blinding white, clutching her baby tight against her chest. Her breath came in sharp clouds, her body shaking, her steps unsteady, but she would not let go. The wind tore at her clothes, the cold cut through her skin, and each heartbeat felt like her last. She knew no one could hear her cries, no one could see her struggle, and yet she prayed with every step that somehow her child would live. As the storm raged, her strength faded, her knees buckled, and she sank into the snow. She thought it was the end, until a silent shadow appeared before her eyes. The shadow moved closer, tall and silent, a dark figure cutting through the blizzard as if the storm itself feared him. But the mother's vision was blurred and weak, her lashes heavy with ice, her breath shallow and broken, her body nearly sinking beneath the crushing weight of the snow. Yet her arms tightened around the small bundle against her chest, as if life itself was locked in her fragile hold. And the storm screamed louder, winds tearing across the open land with a voice that sounded almost human, like restless spirits calling from the other side. But she could not answer them. She could not even lift her head. She could only feel the icy needles biting her skin and the slow fading rhythm of her own heartbeat, each thump slower, weaker, more distant than the last. While her child stirred faintly inside the blanket, a tiny sound lost against the roaring sky. And in that desperate moment, she thought of the warmth of her cabin, the gentle crackle of fire, the memory of a soft lullaby that once filled the nights with safety. But all of it felt like a dream slipping beyond her reach, as the cold earth pressed against her knees and the darkness whispered her name. Yet even in that agony she would not surrender her child. Her arms refused to release him, her body a broken shield against the storm. And just as the world began to vanish into white nothingness, she felt a presence, firm and steady, the ground trembling faintly under deliberate steps, and a tall figure emerged through the veil of snow, his face stern and unreadable, his dark eyes sharp as obsidian, his hair tied back, his movements calm and purposeful. A silent Apache warrior who carried with him the weight of countless winters, and though no words escaped his lips, the mother sensed an unspoken vow, something unbreakable in the way he stood over her fragile form, the storm bending around him as though nature itself recognized his strength. And he knelt beside her, his shadow falling across her trembling body, his hand steady as it touched the frozen edge of the blanket that held the child. And in that single touch she felt a surge of life, as if the wilderness had offered one final chance. But her eyes fluttered with exhaustion, her voice gone, her body no longer able to fight. And still she clung to her baby, her heart whispering its last prayer, trusting a stranger she had never seen, a warrior whose silence was louder than thunder. And the storm howled on, carrying their fates into the night, where life and death balanced on the thin edge of his decision. The warrior leaned closer, his breath steady despite the violent storm, his sharp gaze locked on the frail figure trembling against the snow. And in the dim blur of swirling flakes, he saw the tiny face of the child pressed against her chest, a fragile spark of life barely moving beneath layers of frozen fabric. And his jaw tightened with silent resolve, for he knew the cold could steal them both before the next hour passed. Yet he made no sound, no word to break the wild silence, only the quiet rhythm of his movements as he brushed snow from her shoulders and studied the way her body curved protectively around the infant, every bone rigid with the last traces of her will. And though she seemed lost between breath and silence, her arms refused to yield, clutching that small weight with a strength only love could create. And he understood without needing to ask that she had chosen to suffer rather than let go. And that choice stirred something within him, an echo of battles fought and blood spilled, a reminder that life was sacred even in the harshest land. So he shifted his stance, kneeling low, his cloak heavy with snow yet still holding the warmth of his body, and his hand moved with a deliberate gentleness, lifting the edge of the fabric that covered the child to see the faint movement of its chest, proof that breath still lingered though faint. And in that instant the storm seemed to pause, as if waiting for him to decide their fate, while the mother's eyes fluttered, half open, unfocused, searching through the blur until they found the shape of his face. And though she could not speak a word, her gaze begged with a depth of fear and hope that pierced deeper than any cry. And the warrior did not turn away. He let her see the strength in his silence, the unshaken calm in his eyes, a promise carried without language. Then slowly he unfastened his own cloak, a thick hide worn by years of winters, and spread it wide before wrapping it around both mother and child in one sweeping motion, pressing them close to shield them from the fury of the storm. And as he lifted her into his arms, her body hung limp, but her hands remained locked around the baby, refusing to separate even as her strength failed. And he carried them as though their weight was nothing, his steps firm, deliberate, cutting through the drifts with the endurance of a man who had walked farther than most could imagine. The wind clawing at his face, the snow lashing his skin, but nothing slowed him. And in the distance the mountains loomed like shadows of ancient guardians, their ridges sharp against the gray sky. And though the wilderness had always been merciless, he walked as though the land itself opened a path for him, carrying the fragile lives of a woman and her child through the storm's wrath, toward whatever destiny awaited them at dawn. The weight of her body in his arms told him how close she was to slipping beyond the reach of life, her skin pale and rigid, her lips cracked and blue from the merciless cold. Yet even in that fragile state, her arms clung to the infant with a strength that defied death itself, and the warrior paused beneath the whipping snow, lowering to one knee as the storm raged around him, his dark hair coated in ice, his breath steady but heavy with the knowledge that every second mattered. And as he studied her face, he saw more than weakness. He saw the fire of a mother who would rather fall into the endless night than loosen her grip on the child she guarded. And something inside him shifted, a silent recognition that this was not a simple act of survival, but a vow carved into her very soul, the kind of vow no storm could shatter. So he placed his hand gently against her cheek, feeling the faint trace of warmth that still lingered beneath the frost, a fragile spark that could vanish if he hesitated. And for the first time since he had found her, time itself seemed to hold still, the wind pausing, the snow caught mid-air, as though the wilderness awaited his choice. And he knew that if he turned away now, she and the child would vanish into the frozen silence before the world ever remembered their names. But he was not a man to turn from fate, so he pressed his cloak tighter around them, his arms firm yet careful as he drew them closer against his chest, sharing his own body heat. His heartbeat strong and steady against the frail rhythm of hers, and the child stirred faintly between them, a soft sound like a whimper breaking through the storm's howl, reminding him that life still fought within those fragile lungs. And he rose again, his steps deep in the drifts, each one a battle against the weight of snow pressing to his knees. Yet he carried them without hesitation, his jaw set, his silence unbroken, for words were meaningless against death, only action mattered. And the mother, though her eyes fluttered shut, felt the steadiness of his hold, the unshaken strength of a stranger who refused to abandon her. And though her body sagged into darkness, her arms never loosened, her fingers stiff but unyielding, still guarding the fragile heartbeat she loved more than her own. And as the warrior pressed forward, his figure cutting through the wilderness, it was as if he carried not only their bodies, but also the weight of her promise, the vow of a mother who would not surrender. And in that relentless storm, where death lingered on every breath, the thin line between life and silence narrowed to the strength of his steps and the fragile will of her embrace. The storm clawed at his face, sharp winds lashing like blades, yet he pressed forward with unwavering steps, the weight of mother and child bound tightly in the warmth of his cloak against his chest. And though their bodies were fragile, their presence seemed heavier than stone, for he carried not just flesh and bone but the fragile thread of life itself. And with every step his muscles burned as the snow deepened, rising to his thighs, dragging at his boots, threatening to pull him into the earth. But his stride never faltered, his silence never broke, for he knew that even one pause could let the cold claim them. And so he pushed through the storm, with the patience of the mountains themselves, his breath slow and steady, fogging the frozen air as he bent his frame against the wind. And within the shelter of his cloak the woman stirred faintly, her eyelids flickering, her lips trembling with the ghost of a sound that never found its voice. Yet he felt the shift of her weight, the weak movement of her fingers as they clung to her child. And that frail motion was enough to harden his resolve, for he understood that she still fought, still held on though the storm had tried to strip her strength. And so he pulled the cloak tighter, pressing them deeper against his chest so they could feel his heartbeat, a steady rhythm like a drum that declared they were not yet lost. And he turned his gaze toward the dim line of trees in the distance, their dark shapes barely visible through the veil of snow, knowing that shelter lay beyond, a place where fire could burn and warmth could return. But the journey would test every ounce of his endurance, for the wilderness did not forgive weakness and the storm showed no mercy, hurling ice against his skin, coating his hair in frost. Yet he moved with the patience of a hunter, measuring each step, his arms never loosening, his strength never wavering. And in that relentless march he carried not only their bodies, but also the fragile hope that life could endure in the harshest of trials. And though the world around them screamed with chaos, there was peace within his silence, a calm force that defied the storm. And when the child whimpered softly from beneath the heavy folds of his cloak, the sound was like a spark against the night, proof that the fire of life still burned. And he pressed on step after step, leaving behind a trail swallowed quickly by the snow, but never looking back, only forward, carrying them deeper into the heart of the storm toward the promise of safety that waited beyond the wilderness. The first light of dawn broke through the storm, casting a pale glow over the Apache camp where smoke curled gently into the morning sky, and as the warrior laid the mother and her child beside the fire, the crackle of flames answered the silence of the night, filling the air with the warmth they had fought so hard to find. And when the baby's cry rose, it cut through the frost like a song of life returning, stirring the woman from the edge of darkness, her eyes opening slowly, weak but alive, her gaze falling upon the warrior who stood near without a word, his expression carved from stone yet carrying a depth that spoke louder than any sound. And in that moment she understood that fate had chosen mercy through his hands, that she and her child had been carried back from death itself, and though he offered no promise in speech, his silence had already vowed that their story was not meant to end in the snow.